Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Canales, and I will be talking today about object oriented programming. And moving on to the next part. The topics that I will be covering are what are classes and objects, what is a constructor, what are member fields and member methods when we are talking about classes and objects, what is inheritance, overloading and overriding, what is polymorphism, and show some examples of it, what are abstract classes and abstract methods, and I will only be showing you the overall idea, and what are interfaces. Encapsulation are also topics that I will be covering. None of these I'm going to be covering too much in depth. I just want to give you the overall idea so that you understand everything. And also know that the snippets of codes that I will be posting on this PowerPoint are part of a bigger code that I made, a bigger program. And the main motivation for doing that program was I am a biology major and I like talking about biology, right? So the example that I'm giving you is basically, there are several kingdoms, right? We have the Animalia kingdom and the Protist kingdom. And so underneath those big sections, Animalia and Protista, you have many different organisms that lie on that category, right? And basically, I'm gonna show you two classes, which are gonna be the basically Protista and Animalia, and underneath that classes, I am gonna also have another classes. So animals, right? Animals belong to the animal kingdom, right? And underneath it, animal kingdom, there are the koala class and the lion class, but I will be showing you more in depth about these. But I will try my best to understand everything so that everything seems clear, and with the examples that I provide, you're able to understand these concepts. To begin with, what are classes and objects? And I want you to know that a class is like a blueprint from which many objects can be created from. And the example that I want you to think is a class. Remember that a class is similar to a blueprint, right? On the other hand, an object is an instance of a class, and it has states and behaviors. And so I want you to think as the object being the actual building of the houses. So you have that blueprint, that class, and from that blueprint you can create many different houses. So from one class you can create many different objects, and you can name them object 1, object 2, whatever seems more perfect for you. And the example that I want you to show is right here on the right. I have this koala class, and in the next part, I show you how I instantiate that koala class. And the first object that I create is called object 1, but you can create object 2, object 3, and that's just the main idea of a class. In the main method, you can instantiate that koala class. And also know that classes have member fields, and member fields are basically variables that belong to the class. And right here in this example, I have koala lifespan. There's also the string koala sleep, the string koala habitat, and all of these are basically like features of a class. So features of a koala, what are the things that are related to a koala? The lifespan, how many hours of sleep does it get? What kind of habitat? So it's basically a description of the class. And whatever you want that class to be doing, whatever behaviors and states you want that class doing. And also over here you can create functions inside that class, and these are called member methods. They are functions inside of a class. So right here I have a koala description, right? So when I instantiate the koala and I call onto this member method, I should be able to get on the screen these features. So on the output, I should be able to get the average lifespan for a koala in the wild is that many years, or koalas like to sleep about so many hours, and they like to live in a certain habitat. So those things should be displayed. And right here I as I said before, you're basically creating an object, you are instantiating the class. That's just the main idea. Moving on, what is a constructor? A constructor is basically like a member method inside of the class. It's like similar, but basically what it does, it's gonna initialize the newly created object. And a constructor will have the same name as a class name. So if you're looking for the constructor or how to create a constructor, all you do is just name it the same as the class that you are creating. So in this example, this constructor is called koala, and the koala constructor is going to initialize all my variables. And in this example, I used this pointer. Moving on, what is inheritance? Inheritance is a very important concept when dealing with object-oriented programming. And inheritance in Java is when a class inherits all the fields and methods from another class. And I want you to think about this example of heredity, right? Heredity in humans or in animals and many different species, right? So as a biologist major, I like to think of inheritance as basically, there's the parent, right? And the child of that parent is going to inherit some features, right? It's going to inherit it's going to get maybe the red color from the mom or the eyes of the dad. Some things are going to be inherited. And this concept applies the same to object-oriented programming in Java. So you have this class that is called a superclass. That superclass is also known as the parent class. And you have that subclass, which will be like the child class, right? And the subclass is going to inherit the features of the superclass. And in order to distinguish when inheritance is, happening, basically you have this keyword that is used by the subclass. And that keyword is going to tell you that class is inheriting from a different superclass. And there are many different inheritance, types of inheritance in Java, right? In object-oriented programming. You have single, multi-level, multiple, right? And as you can see in this picture, it gives you like a little graph so that you can understand the main idea. And the one that I'm going to be talking about in this particular case is going to be single inheritance, where you have one subclass inheriting from one superclass. So how does this look in code, right? So here is some sample code of the koala class that has this extends feature. And that extends feature is going to tell me that this is the subclass and this is the superclass, right? And that's basically it. You can extend a class, and also know that whenever you are calling on to this particular class, when you're creating an object, when you're creating that object also has access to this parent class, to that superclass. So all of these features will be inherited by this class. Parent class, right? And child class. And moving on, I also want to talk about polymorphism. And polymorphism is also a very important concept in Java, and it's a very simple concept. Poly means many, morphism means form. And polymorphism is the ability of an object to take on many forms. And here I have this sample code to explain a little bit this whole concept. And based on this, you can tell that the koala class is polymorphic, right? Because it has multiple inheritance. So the koala class extends the animal and it's going to implement a herbivore. So basically this is telling me that a koala is an animal and that animal is a herbivore. A herbivore means that it's an animal that feeds mainly on plants, right? So it's polymorphic because it can take many forms. A koala is a herbivore, a koala is an animal, and a koala is a koala. And right here in the sample code, we have a koala object 1, right, being created, instantiated. And as we said, a koala object can take on many forms. So a koala object can take the animal object form. A koala object can take on a herbivore object, right? And it's a very important concept that I want you to know, and I want you to really understand. The next concept that I will be explaining is overloading, right? You have two types of these behaviors that are very similar, but they have a specific difference, right? You have method overloading and method overriding, and I will be explaining both of these. But to begin with, I want to explain about method overloading. And method overloading is when you have two or more methods in one class that have the same name but different parameters, right? So, okay, how does that make sense, right? So let's look at the code that I provided. You have a lion class. Overall, this will be a lion class. This will belong to the lion class, right? And inside of the lion class, you have these two member methods that have the same name: lion display, lion display. And how will when you try to instantiate the lion class, and when you are trying to call that lion display method, right, how is the program going to know which one to call, right? And this is when method overloading comes into place, right? It depends on the parameters. The parameters will matter as to which one will be displayed, right? So let's say that you are instantiating the lion class and you are using the object to call lion display. And let's put it into the first scenario so that you understand this concept. When you're calling that member method lion display from the object, as it can be seen in this part, object.lion display, right? And if you send 10, it will know, because you're only one parameter, you're sending one parameter, right? And this class this member method, has one parameter, right? And this one has two. And this is how the program is gonna differentiate between the two member methods, right? If you send 10, it should be able to call this member method, and that is method overloading. You have the same method name but different parameter. So when you're sending 10 and you're calling that function, this is what it should display: the average lifespan of a lion is 10 years. And let's look at the other scenario that there can be, right? If you're calling this lion display method, you're sending 10 and you're also sending 130, right? It will know that it should be this function. So on the output of the program, it should display the average lifespan of a lion is 10 years and the average weight of a lion is 130 pounds. It depends everything on the number of parameters that you have, right? That is method overloading. Now, what could be the other scenario, the other concept, right? Object overriding. In object overriding, member method overriding is when you have two methods that have the same method name and the same parameters. And in that case, how will the computer or the program know which one to call? If it has the same method name, it has the same parameters, right? But this deals with inheritance, with the concept that we just learned, right? So now we're going to apply that concept right here to understand what is method overriding. And one of the methods will be from the superclass and the other will be from the subclass. And right here we have this lion class that is the subclass, and the animal class right here will be the super. So let's right here super. I'm sorry if you can't see the writing, but just subclass, right? So that is the two different classes. And notice that these two have the same name, same method name, same method. And you have over here same method. So due to the inheritance of these two classes, the subclass will override the superclass. The subclass will override the superclass. That means that if you're calling the same method name when you're instantiating the animal, no, when you are instantiating the lion class, due to this concept of inheritance and method overriding, you should be displaying this is the child class. And in fact, this is true, right? When you are calling the lion object and you're creating that lion object and you're calling the same method name, and the program is wondering which one am I gonna get, because of inheritance, it should be displaying the child class. And this is true. When I run this program, it displays method overriding. This is the child class, and that is method overriding. That is the concept. And I really hope that you understand it, because it's very simple. It's very, very simple. Okay, moving on. What is encapsulation, right? And encapsulation is also a very important concept in Java. And it's basically the wrapping up of data under a single unit and then preventing it from being accessed by code outside of the unit. And it's like, think of it as a little like capsule, little pill, right? And you have inside, certain things that cannot be accessed by outside things, right? And basically inside of that capsule, think of variables and data being inside, hiding from other classes. And this is known as data hiding. And it's very similar again to making a connection to biology, right? You have like a cell, right? And that cell has that cell membrane, right? That protective layer, and inside, those things that are inside cannot be accessed by just all kinds of different stuff that is outside of the cell, right? There are many different receptors that that are able to know and control what comes in and out of the cell. And this is basically the same thing with encapsulation. You have a certain control on what has access to your data. And how do you implement encapsulation? And it's very simple to implement this concept of encapsulation. Basically, you will declare the variables in a class as private, and then you will have public setters and getter methods that are gonna have access to the variables. And basically, here in encapsulation, we have this class that is Protista. And again, going back to my reference to biology, right? You have the kingdom of Protista, and you have the kingdom of Animalia, and under those are many different organisms and species that belong to that specific category. And inside the class Protista, I put here, remembering that to put the methods as private, right? This is one of the requirements. Put the variables as private. Okay, once that is done, good. What is the next step? You're gonna have to provide public setters, right? And we have string set get unicellular. Another public string get multicellular, right? And it's gonna, those two are gonna get the values, and they're gonna return the values, right? Get and return. And the next part, you have to provide getter methods to access the variable. So basically, these are the public void set unicellular, and it's gonna have that value. And the unicellular is gonna be U, multicellular is M. And basically, when I want to run this piece of code, and I have to make an object, and in this case I named it object P of the Protista class. And to do this, I'm gonna use the setter methods to set those values. And an organism that I thought that was a good example of a unicellular organism was an amoeba, right? And it's a Protista. And the good example that I thought for a multicellular organism was algae, right? And it's a multicellular organism. It has many different cells. And using the getter methods, I am able to display them. So right here, unicellular amoeba, multicellular algae, And this is a very, very nice example of how you can implement encapsulation. You protect, your variables, but you can allow through public setters and getters so that you can grab that information from a different class. So what is an abstract class, right? And this is a very simple concept that, when I was first learning this, it was very hard to understand. But now that I know everything, that I know like the main concept, right, I can explain to you so that you can understand. And an abstract class is a class that cannot be used to create objects. So there are many different features, right? An abstract class is a class that cannot be used to create objects. Second thing, in order to access an abstract class, it must be inherited from another class. An abstract method can only be used in an abstract class, but it has no body. So when you have that abstract method, you cannot have a body, right? You cannot create a body of that class because it is abstract. You have to create it in the other class. And the body can be written in the subclass. So think of an abstract class, right? And you have that abstract class is going to be basically like a superclass. And then you have a subclass, right, that is inheriting the stuff from the abstract class. In that subclass, you can do the method and the abstract method, and then you can write the body, right? So I know this might be a little bit hard to understand, but next, basically, this is an example, right? And in my example, basically, I have the class animal. Oh, sorry, misspelled that. Animal. And from that animal class, that is the subclass, I also have the class typical food. And the typical food is the abstract method. And abstract classes serve a very good purpose, right? Like when you have many different animals, like a lion class or a zebra class, or other animals, right? You can use this typical class that was inherited from that abstract class to say, well, the typical food of a koala is eucalyptus, right? Eucalyptus. And the typical food of a lion is basically meat, right? And the typical, and so on. You were able to use that to serve your own purpose. And I know this might be a little bit hard to understand, but here in this example, I have this abstract class animal. And this will be the superclass. And you also have this koala class that will be the subclass. Oh, sorry, I write so bad. Subclass. And so basically that koala class is gonna inherit all of the features from that main class, from that superclass animal. And basically, so you have the same method, right? And you have this typical food method that it has no body. So that's how you know another way that it's an abstract class. And you have that keyword abstract. And right here you have an implementation of the abstract method from the abstract class. And you have the koala like to eat eucalyptus, right? And as I said, you can have a lion class and that lion is gonna eat meat, right? So that's just a feature, right? But that's how you implement an abstract class in an abstract method. Moving on, what is an interface? And I know that it might be confusing, but an interface is very similar to an abstract class. And an interface cannot be used to create objects, interface methods do not have a body the same way that they don't have abstract methods do not have a body either. And to access an interface, the interface must be implemented by another class and by using the implements keyword. Classes can implement more than one interface, and that's one main difference, right? That abstract classes can only be like other classes can only do like implement one abstract class, but with interfaces you can implement many different interfaces. And interface methods are going to be by default abstract and public. Interface fields are by default public, static, and final. So how do you write an interface, right? It's very, very simple to write an interface. You basically create public interface herbivore, right? Public interface herbivore, and you have this method, right? And you can create many different methods like herbivore description or other things. But notice that you cannot have a body in this method. So right here in this koala class, that's going to extend the animal, and also it's going to implement the herbivore interface. So this tells me that it's going to implement a herbivore interface. And inside of this, we have this public void public void herbivore description. And this is how you write an interface. This is how you can use it. Like you can use like a tool that you can use, and you can create many different classes, like like I said, zebra, a coyote, many different animals, and then you can use that to tell you the description. And it's very simple. So how do you write an interface? A continuation, right? When you implement it, it's gonna be right here. You are gonna where's the little so basically I have this object, creative object 1 from the koala class, and that object 1 is you can have access to that herbivore description, and that's how you implement an interface. And moving on, hold on. So basically, when you implement this piece of code and everything, I want you to ignore the rest because it was from the overall program that I wrote. But right here you have the output, right, of the screen. And basically, I want you to look at this part. A herbivore is an animal that feeds on plants. That's what this is going to tell you, right? Because right here, a herbivore is an animal that feeds on plants. And a herbivore is an animal that feeds on plants. And I'm going to skip a little bit through the code. But here are your examples of two different interfaces, right? We have the herbivore and the carnivore. This is, how you can implement it. And if we skip to the lion class, this one right here, you can implement carnivore. So that you know that a lion is an animal and is also a carnivore, right? And you're implementing the interface carnivore right here. A carnivore is an animal that eats mostly meat. And okay, so going back, I hope that you understood everything. I conclude with an interface, right? An interface, again, it is the methods do not have a body. You can implement it by using the implements keyword. You can create classes can implement more than one interface, right? Very simple concept. I hope that you understood everything. And the complete code that I provided is right here. You have the animal kingdom, and I put kingdom because of the biology relatedness, but this is a class, animal class. And underneath that category, you have many different animals, many different types of animals that feed on many different things. And right here, I have this animal class, right? And this will be my super class, and I hope that you learn about inheritance. The super class is the parent class, right? And then I also have another super class, which is the protista. And the protista kingdom or class, right? I put some stuff here. Oh, and remember that this was really in relation to encapsulation. right? Had like public setters and getters. And then the koala class, we also talk about this. We talked about member fields, a constructor. What is a constructor? It has the same name as the class. What are member methods, right? These are some member methods. How to implement an interface, right? And how to implement an abstract method. That was two different concepts that we learned in this PowerPoint. This is the lion class. A lion is an animal that is a carnivore because it eats meats. And these are, again, examples of member fields, right? I did not write a constructor for this class, but I hope that you understand what a constructor is. We have method overriding. Here is an example. This is the child class. We learned about implementing an interface carnivore. That was a different example. We have method overloading, right? We learned that method overloading is the same method name but different parameters, right? Here we have one parameter, and over here we have two parameters. So when you're calling, it will know by the number of parameters, by the many different parameters that you have. We learned about interfaces, right? We also learned about this. And in the main class, we learned about what are objects, right? And what are objects, how to instantiate an object. So here, koala object 1, we have an object from lion. We have an object from the protista class. And we learned about the inheritance, right? When you can access the methods of a superclass when you are instantiating an object from a subclass, right? The subclass will inherit everything from the superclass. We learned about the setter methods, encapsulation. So this will encompass all the things that we covered, right? And this is the output of everything, right? An animal is a multicellular organism that has specialized sense organs, voluntary movement responses. And I'm so sorry that this cut off. I'm so sorry. These are features from the member methods of the koala description. The average lifespan of a koala in the wild is 13 years. Koalas like to sleep about 22 hours, and they like to live in tall eucalypt forests because that's what they eat. What is an animal? Herbivore, when we did the herbivore interface, and the typical food from the abstract method, right? Typical food. You can implement that abstract from many different, like lion class and so on. We learned about method overloading again, but this is everything that we talked about, and this will be the overall display of the entire program. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that you learned a lot.